Humanity in Crisis will bring to you some of the biggest issues that exist in our world today. Each programme will tackle a different crisis, from gender equality and conflict zones through to poverty and recession. These issues may seem far removed from our lives, but take a closer look and you'll find they indiscriminately impact us all. Just go through your wardrobes and kitchen cupboards and you'll find at least one product made by a child or in a country that uses child labour. Now, the International Labour Office, a United Nations specialised agency in child labour, estimates that over 200 million children are engaged in work. Most work in hazardous conditions, don't go to school, don't receive proper care or nutrition, and don't get time to play. Children work in all parts of the world, but it's the type of work they do and how it impacts on them which determines whether it's considered child labour or not. So, how do we define child labour?
Child labour is when young children are forced to work for a very little wage.
Get children to work, I'm guessing, making them work, maybe exploiting children and making them work.
Child labour is children working when they should be growing up and playing.
Child labour is where children are made to work.
Child trafficking is selling children for labour, basically.
Mainly kids getting sent around the country, around the world to work, prostitution, things like that.
When like a child is brought through, like maybe by a boat or something like that, and then they're sort of passing them around to different people in different countries.
Child labour is work carried out by children which deprives them of their childhood, their potential and their dignity, and is harmful to their physical or mental development. However, not all work carried out by children is child labour. Any work that doesn't impact their health or development isn't considered as such. Child trafficking is one of the worst forms of child labour and is the recruitment or transportation of persons by coercion or deception for money or exploitation. Not so long ago, children as young as 4 years old were used for work across a wide range of sectors in the UK. Child exploitation was in fact vital for Britain's economic success in the 19th century. But as household incomes rose and laws prohibiting child labour were passed, child labour gradually died out in most of Europe and the United States. Nonetheless, child labour and child trafficking still exists today.
I think the reason that children are labouring rather than working and therefore harming themselves is probably driven by four things. So first of all, there's poverty, family not having enough income to pay for food. Secondly, there's debt, where parents may take loans that their children have to pay off by working. Thirdly, the very poor quality education, where there isn't really a good alternative to children aside from working. And finally, sometimes children are simply coerced into working by people who are there to exploit them because they're younger and more vulnerable.
When faced with extreme poverty, overwhelming pressures are felt not only by the families, but the children too, in making difficult decisions about their survival. Under these circumstances, a child working might seem like the accepted norm, and families in abject poverty quite often expect their children to work. However, child labour is also taking places in regions you might not expect, wealthy nations like the UK. Every year, hundreds of children are trafficked into Britain to work across a wide range of sectors. Let's find out what the British public know about child exploitation in this country.
I know there's a lot of it, it's just the media doesn't tell you a lot about it, but there is a lot of it.
Not very much. I mean, you hear about it happening in other countries.
I think it does exist here, but I think it's sort of really hard to notice.
Children are trafficked into the UK for a variety of reasons, including sexual exploitation, drug trafficking, domestic servitude, petty theft and benefit fraud. This is happening in British communities despite extensive laws being in place and many organisations working tirelessly to prevent it. One of Britain's leading children's rights organisations, ECPAT UK, works to end exploitation, abuse and the trafficking of children. I'm here to meet with Head of Advocacy Chloe Setter to get an insight into the world of child trafficking. Hundreds of children are trafficked into the UK each year. How are they trafficked? What is the age range? And where do the majority of these children come from?
Government figures estimate 500 children are trafficked into the UK each year, but we know this to be the tip of the iceberg. Children are trafficked for a variety of reasons, such as sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, forced labour, or being forced to commit criminal acts. The children can be any age, but they're mostly between 16 and 17, however sometimes much lower. For example, in the last quarter of 2012, there were 13 under-11s identified. The children are coming from a number of countries, up to 43 in 1 year, but the top 5 are Nigeria, Vietnam, the UK, Albania and Romania, and China too. We see them coming in through many routes into the UK, such as smuggled on the back of lorries, flying into mainstream airports using false passports. And what makes it very difficult is often they have no documentation or false documentation, which makes it very difficult for them to be identified correctly.
What usually happens once a child is taken by a trafficker?
The things that can happen once a child has been taken by a trafficker is they can be drugged, they can be exposed to types of abuse along a journey, and sometimes we know that the trafficker would actually travel with the child, for example, sitting behind them on an airplane in order to exert control. Alternatively, they may be passed from agent to agent across different countries in order to then be sold to whoever wants to exploit them in the UK.
We took the testimony of one of these children who we'll be referring to as Sarah. She is represented by an actress. After her parents' relationship broke down, Sarah's mother moved out and her father took her to live with her grandmother. Sarah was 12 years old when her mother's friend, whom she called Auntie, offered to take her to London.
When she came to the village, she visited my granny and they had a chat. She said, "Would I like to travel? And I have never been anywhere before, only from city to village." So, when she said, "Do you want to travel?" I said, "Sure, why not?" I had never heard of England or London before.
How and why are children trafficked and exploited, and what are the dangers involved?
There are many reasons that children end up being trafficked and exploited. They can be abducted from their family homes, or they can be forced into doing it, or alternatively they can actually be tricked, and we often see that that's the case even for the whole family. They're often sold a dream of a better life in the UK, access to education, or legitimate employment in which they might be able to send money home, because poverty is a huge driving factor of trafficking. But unfortunately, when the child actually does leave, they end up being exposed to violence, to rape, to hard labour, and they're ultimately left in a country far away from their families with no one looking after them, no one out to protect them, and they're hugely vulnerable.
Once Sarah reached London, she and the woman she called Auntie moved into a woman's house whom Sarah had never met before. She had 2 children of her own and there was another girl staying with them. The woman who brought her to London left Sarah at that house after a few months, saying she would return for her, but she never did.
I was doing the cleaning. No one else was doing it. The girl that was there before me, I didn't know who she is or what she was doing in the house. All I know is that she go out and come back late at night. So, I don't know what they were doing, so I was just doing the cleaning. In my country, there is no way you can complain, especially to a grown-up. Especially, I wouldn't, because you would get a slap for it. So I couldn't say anything. I was not allowed to do anything. I was the one doing all the cleaning and cooking and looking after the children. But I am not even allowed to take the kids to school.
When Sarah did try to go out one day, she got slapped. She also got punished when she didn't do the house chores to the owner's standards. There were men coming in and out of the house frequently, and there seemed to be no escape for her, no one to help.
I was getting beaten by the men. I was smacked and raped. I never go out to ask for help. No one ever come round to ask what is going on, or if anything is happening. No one ever asked questions. So I didn't know who to go to ask for help. I was like a slave. And every time I kept bleeding. I kept trying to clean myself up and I kept getting cold. And she was always shouting, asking me to keep cleaning, even if the house is clean. I have to keep cleaning. And she has to call me to do something.
What happens to a child once rescued from its exploiter?
Once a child has been identified, that's often not the end of the story, unfortunately. They're still highly vulnerable. For example, ECPAT UK research found that around 2/3 of children will actually go missing from local authority care, and often to be re-trafficked and re-exploited in other parts of the UK or even other parts of Europe. There's really highly vulnerable children that need a lot of support and protection, which is why we're campaigning for a system of guardianship, so that each child has someone with legal responsibility who can advocate for their best interests and act as a link between the multiple agencies that the child encounters while they're here.
By chance one night, whilst out looking for food, her path crossed that of a girl out socialising who listened to her story and took her home, gave her a bath and new clothes, and introduced her to her partner who was also of Nigerian descent, like Sarah.
I was scared of staying in the flat because it was so huge, big. I was scared. I was like, what is going to happen to me? This time, this one is going to kill me. So he said he was going to look after me. And he looked after me.
Fortunately for Sarah, her fears were never realised, as the man she was staying with took care of her and eventually became her guardian. But Sarah's story is only one out of 1.2 million children the International Labour Organisation estimates are trafficked globally each year. How can we tackle child trafficking?
One of the simplest things that we can do to better improve the UK's response to child trafficking is to give training to those who are tasked with identification so that they can recognise the indicators and help these children. The children do not present with a label on saying I'm a victim, and they often, when asked or challenged, will not speak out because of the fear of the consequences. So we need to be training the police, the social workers, border authorities, health workers, teachers, in order to pick up on the signs, and if they've got any suspicion, they know how to act. The other thing we must do is improve prosecution rates in the UK. There were only 8 convictions in 2011 under the human trafficking legislation. This is not sending out a tough enough message that the UK is acting on trafficking and will seek to punish those who exploit children.